Good evening and welcome to the GoToWebinar series. This is our first series with the Committee for the Future, and the topic is using data on Black women to achieve greater impact. I am the Director of Communications, Kevin Johannes, and I would just like to give you a few house notes so we can keep moving. If you are on a computer, you will see a menu and there's a section called Questions. Please type your question in there and we will make sure that it is answered during our Q&A period. As well as if you want to raise your hand, you can do that as well. And I see we already have one of those. In the meantime, if you have any problems with static or whatnot, I suggest you log out and then log back in. You may hear this entire webinar on our ncnw.org website, as well as our NCNW headquarters YouTube page, and it should be up within the week. At this time, we'd like to turn it over to the chair of the Committee for the Future Committee, Ms. Deborah Foster.
Good evening, and I also extend my welcome to you to this webinar. The Committee for the Future, which we lovingly refer to as C4F, is pleased to sponsor tonight's event. In a moment, you're going to hear a little more about the committee and our role in this research and report. I did want to mention, though, before we get started, that there are 2 sessions. This is the first, and there'll be a second tomorrow. Tonight, we're going to focus on demographics and health, trends among Black women, and in part 2, we will relate to social media usage, giving, volunteering, voting, things such as that. You'll also have a chance to hear from leaders of NCNW's Fund Development Strategy about how they use the data to support their work. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my awesome co-chair to get us started and just tell you a little bit about C4F.
Thank you, Debbie. Good evening, everyone. I'm Cheryl Brown, and along with an amazing team of women of varying demographics, we are C4F, and we're from different parts of the country. We are in different age demographics. We are married, with children, grown to infant. So we cover a range of who Black women are within NCNW. But when we got started with our work, and the idea being to, the mandate that we were given from Dr. Cole being to come up with what does NCNW need to do and be in order to move forward successfully in the future on its mission. We said, well, who are Black women now? We can do it anecdotally, we can talk about who we are, or we can be data driven. And we chose the latter, of course. And that meant finding somebody who could help us understand who are Black women, who are the constituents, the stakeholders in the work that NCNW does. And Crystal Ramser was invaluable in helping us find the right consultants to pull together statistics, demographics, information to identify who we are. Well, what we found is we are everything. We are so many things that it would be difficult to contain it easily. So a framework had to be drawn, and the consultants who you're going to hear more about shortly did a brilliant job pulling together the framework, starting with, they told us, the wings and the roots that we described where we were, and Dr. Cole's statement and vision of who the organization is. From that, they came up with a way to look at our lives as Black women, from very young women to elders, from single to married, from mothers, from our work lives, our health lives, all range of who we are. From that, we've put together what we think is a framework that will allow NCNW to build and grow and move forward in a way that will be actionable. So it's a framework for action that you're going to learn about tonight and hear about how it's already being applied. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Crystal, and thank you again, Crystal, for all you have done for us as a committee and for NCNW. We can never thank you enough. And as you introduce these wonderful consultants who put together this idea for us, and I can't wait for everybody to hear the way they did it. I don't want to tell you all the details. I want them to break it down for you, so I won't steal that thunder, but it's brilliant.
Well, thank you, Cheryl, and thank you to the Committee for the Future and our Chair and National President, Dr. Cole. Good evening, everyone. My name is Crystal Ramsor, and I'm the Chief Administrative Officer with NCNW. And I have the pleasure tonight to introduce this excellent team that you'll be hearing from. Tony and James serve as a reimagination team and take a customer-centric design thinking approach to equipping organizations, teams, and individuals to reimagine and remain relevant in unprecedented times. They bring extensive experience of creating, facilitating, implementing capable plans anchored in what an organization needs. And that is truly what we were looking for when we brought these gentlemen on and this team together to help us with this project. James and Tony have supported NCNW's mission through securing strategic data to understand the external environment of NCNW and our target membership, understand Black women and the general environment NCNW operates. This will help us to create a blueprint and implementation plan to support the state of the Black woman, girl, and community. This data played and continues to play an integral role in the Good Health Wins project, where Tony and James are supporting our efforts. So without any further ado, please welcome Tony and James.
Good evening, everyone. This is Tony, and my partner in crime is James Sela as well. We'd like to thank you guys for the opportunity to spend the evening with you. And thanks, Cheryl, Crystal, and Deb for the kind words. As we get started tonight, you guys know this is part one of a two-part webinar on the state of the Black women. When James and I completed this research, we ended up somewhere with about probably 175 slides to actually share the research. And of course, there's no way we can present 175 slides given two 40-minute sessions. So what we're going to do tonight is do a proper setup as to how we went about the research. And we will primarily share some summary slides of each of the sections of the research that we conducted. Next, James. As Crystal was saying earlier, when you look at the meeting outcome here, is exactly what Crystal was saying in the first two paragraphs here. But what I would like to emphasize is basically the last paragraph. The state of the Black women research allows NCNW to redefine relevance. Redefine relevance by looking through the lens of a Black woman. And relevance is a key word here because it's relevant as it relates to identifying with who we are. It's relevant in identifying with what are the issues that we're all facing. It's relevance that's in identifying with how do we go about solving some of these issues that are on the forefront that we're dealing with. And so when we look through the lens of a Black woman, we looked at it from three perspectives. One, who she is. Two, what's her world in reality at a macro as well as a micro level. And three, what are her potential and possibilities that NCNW can play a major role in helping to achieve. And as we get started, we really need to be clear on what we call the abstract here of the State of the Black Woman Research Study that we conducted in 2020. When you think about the abstract in general, we looked, and what we found is that the African American woman is in a state of socioeconomic inequality and demographic differences. And when you think about this inequality, we're talking about things like income, social class, occupational background, educational achievements, and so forth. And when we think about the demographic differences, we're talking about things like age and gender and ethnicity and marital status, social status and number of children in household and so forth. So those are the kind of areas that we're talking about as we look at these different statuses, if you will. And what we found also is while African American women are still progressing, the state of the Black woman lags in comparison to the US average based on our external research. In this research that we conducted, you'll see that we came from a number of open sources like US Census, US Bureau of Labor Statistics, Centers for Disease Control, US Department of Health and Human Services, and so forth, as well as other data sources like Nielsen and Gallup and McKinsey and Deloitte and Pew Research. And of course, these open sources, you can use these as you need and see fit for the work that you're doing. But in some of these resources, you will have to get permission in order to produce some of this information. Some may be at a cost, but you will have to just check in with those sources to find out exactly what that would be. The other thing we did is we conducted 23 interviews with NCNW leaders and outlined their recommendations as it relates to remaining relevant and activating NCNW's mission, the mission of leading, advocating for, and empowering women of African descent, their families, and communities. Next. So who conducted this research? Of course, Crystal introduced James and I, and we've been organizational development professionals for quite some time now. We worked together for the past 15 years at Coca-Cola, and then we've been business partners for the past 3 years. And one of the things we pride ourselves on is this tagline you see here, being authentic and authentically connecting and asking insightful questions in order to understand what are the issues that an organization is facing and how do we best go about resolving those issues and working with them. So in addition to James and I, we had a number of other resources that work with us. One is NewsRx, which is an outstanding organization that deals with artificial intelligence and database technology. And one of the things they're able to do is they look across the world at research and at data and able to pull it together in a format that's very useful to our clients. And then we also worked along with 2 data scientists, as you can see here, that have very broad backgrounds, from mathematicians to researchers and to developers, techno writers, and that's Angelica and Gabrielle. So we had a great team in order to come in and do this research for you guys. Next. We would be remiss in moving forward without paying some close attention to the strong heritage of NCNW over the past 85 to 86 years, given the strong leadership. And as you can see here, what we tried to do was really outline those strong leaders over the years, starting with Mary McLeod Bethune, who actually started the organization in 1935, to Dorothy Height, who we were calling the matriarch of the organization, that was here for, I don't know, approximately 40 years, all the way now to Dr. Cole, who is the current leader of the organization. As you can see, what we tried to do was really identify with that leader during their particular time in office and kind of what they brought to the table, what their strengths were, and what were some of the outcomes and things that they achieved while in office, if you will. But the thing I'd like to call to your attention is Mary McLeod Bethune's last will and testament. As James and I looked at the history of NCNW, we still think that this last will and testament is still a North Star for NCNW. So I'd just like to read this because I think sometimes hearing the words hits you differently than when you just read them yourself. But the testament and will is, I leave you love. I leave you hope. I leave you the challenge of developing confidence in one another. I leave you a thirst for education. I leave you a respect for the uses of power, faith, racial dignity. I leave you a desire to live harmoniously with your fellow men. and a responsibility to our young people. We think this is a North Star. We think this is the basis of how you continue your legacy as well as continue with your mission. So we think you should keep this at the forefront of everything that you do. Next. So as James and I embarked on this initiative, we said, you know, what are the benefits of doing this work? What's the benefit to NCNW? And you can see the tagline here. It really is to equip NCNW to be a catalyst in turning potential impossibilities into a reality. When you think about the people you serve, you think about the issues that you face, and you think about the solutions that you implement. It's all about how do we turn potential impossibilities into a reality. And so with that comes the following benefits. One, we think this research really helps provide clarity that will help embrace change to remain relevant. And we talked a little about relevance earlier, which is very, very key. And two is to highlight opportunity areas for the organization to engage in matters impacting NCNW's mission. So when you think about these opportunity areas, of course, you know a lot of them already, but when you really delve into the research, it does one of two things. It confirms what you know already, or it adds to what you already know and things that you need to focus on. Number three, it reinforces heritage and convener role, which, you know, it goes back to what I just read about your leaders over the years, as well as the will and testament, and keeping those things at the forefront. And think about from a strategic partnership perspective, you guys are a really strong organization with lots of members and lots of affiliates. And so there's a great potential in moving forward and keeping reinforcing this heritage. Number four, helps NCNW better identify and align resources. Once again, it's about looking at those opportunities. Do we have the right resources? Are we aligned with the right resources in order to help accomplish our goals and objectives, whether it's from the White House all the way to the grassroots into a community? Number five, provide supportive data for grant writing and fundraising, which is pretty self-explanatory. Number six, supports recruitment and retention efforts while remaining rooted in NCNW's rich history. We think this is a key area for NCNW, a key area for you guys to focus on and continue to recruit and continue to retain members of your organization. And we'll talk more about this as we get into some of the data and when we look at the overall numbers of African-American women in the US, and then we'll bring this to home at that time. And then finally, it forms a foundation for ongoing trending of critical data insights. So what we really think is this is a foundation we've started to build in working with you guys, but we think it's something that you should continue and always keep your eyes on the research and what is the data telling you to provide insights in order to move forward in your endeavors. So as James and I embarked on this project, we knew it was going to be very important to have a framework that we can leverage in tying everything together, a framework for connecting with the audience as we're doing tonight, and also a framework in sharing the research. So after much consideration, much debate, here's where we landed. We landed on her world, her reality. So when you look at her world to the left side of the slide, you'll see at the larger part of the circle, you'll see her reality. And at the very core, you'll see at the bottom, her hopes and dreams. Her hopes and dreams and her reality all brought to life and are enabled by those four things in the middle: her career and finances, her physical and mental health, her engagement and involvement, as well as her self-development. So those things, as we said, are enablers to helping achieve her reality, as well as hopes and dreams. So then if we take a more detailed look at her reality, that's where the research is really rooted, because we wanted to be clear and show what the research is saying about what's the reality of the African-American women today, in essence, the state of the Black woman. And so we looked at 5 different areas, if you will. One, we wanted to look at what we call population by the numbers, just looking at the demographics, looking at citizenship, looking at marital status, looking at sexual preferences, gender identification, births, and household types, and those types of things. just so we can get a foundation and a baseline of who we are. And then we went into her health. And you can see the things that are listed there. Thinking about health disparities, mental health, homelessness, adultification biases, as well as incarcerations. And then we looked at her career and finances. And you can see these things as educational levels, household income, expenditures, workforce representation, pay, income, and poverty status. And then we looked at her engagement, her involvement. What does that look like from a technology perspective? What does that look like from a social media, from giving, from volunteering, from a voting perspective? And then finally, her self-development. What's her mindset? What's the future work environment for African-American women? So we thought in coming up with this type of framework was a good way to shape the research and to be able to share the research. And so what you'll find is we'll share the research based on these findings. And tonight, what we're going to do is talk about population by the numbers and her health. And as we debated even more about her world and her reality, James and I also landed on, well, we need to really talk about who she is. And this started from the personas that we received from NCNW about wings and roots. And as we began to look more at the demographics, we broke the wings down into 3 sets of wings. And you can see on the screen, wing 1 is ages 15 to 24. Wing 2, 25 to 34 years of age. Wing 3, 35 to 44. And then we have a core group, which are 45 to 54, and core 2 is 55 to 64. And then we have the roots, which is 65 plus. But we weren't done there because we also identified 2 other categories of personas. One was the underserved, and then the other is pipeline, which are our girls, which means 14 and below from an age perspective. So we thought it was very important that we identify from a persona perspective who she is. James? And so when we look at females by the numbers, if you will, there are 21, and let me be clear, when we did this research back in 2020, you'll see that based on all those data sources we talked about, they will range anywhere from 2017 all the way back down to probably 2012. Just depends on the topic and on the research that was done around that time. And some may be as recent as 2020, but I just wanted to call that out. And so as of 2018 census, there was 21.7 million African-American women. In other words, 7% of the US population. Now, what's interesting is when you look at this breakdown, the median age is 36 years old. But there's it's pretty evenly distributed when you look at the personas across NCNW. The first thing I'll call to your attention is the 19%, which is 4.2 million young ladies. And these are ages 14 and below, which is our pipeline. So when you think about that number of people, that's a huge opportunity for NCNW, a huge opportunity to be relevant and to play a major role in the lives of 4.2 million young ladies. And then when you look at the next 3 bullets, if you will, we look at 15 to 24, 25 to 34, and 35 to 44. That actually makes up 42% of the overall African American population, which is now another huge number. But then if you look at the first 4 bullets, including the 19% of 4.2 million ages below 14, that makes up 61% of the population of African American women in the US. 61%, 44 and below. That's a huge number. It's a huge opportunity for recruitment and for engagement for NCNW. And the way we think you do that is to be relevant, which is the word we talked about earlier. Number 3 here, 12% of Black females over the age of 18 are foreign born, which is very simply mean that they're born outside of their country of residence, versus 3% that are under the age of 18. 5.1% of Blacks are over the age of 18 self-identify as LBGT. And from what we can tell by the research, that number is trending upward, by the way. Approximately 3/4 of Black females are unlikely to be married, with half as never married, if you will. 63% of births among Blacks over the last 12 months were from unmarried women. And for the last 12 months, if you think about 2018 census, it's probably sometime around 2017 leading into 2018 on a 12-month basis, but 63%. And then 27% of Black females are married and in a family household. 23% of Black females are the head of family in a family household. And then the last bullet here, 24% of Black females are single and in a non-family household. And what James and I usually like to say about this kind of data is, you know what, we're just reporting the news. But some of these numbers are astonishing. And one of the things I'll go back to is number 2. There's a huge opportunity for you guys at NCNW in order to recruit and retain many more members. James? And so we'll leave the numbers now and we'll go into what we're calling her health. Her health as relates to health disparities, mental health, homelessness, incarcerations, and so forth. So let's start with population without health insurance. So you'll see that we'll show some slides like this, but then for the most part, as we said earlier, we'll primarily show the recap slides. But we thought it was important to show some of these slides in detail. So once again, this is 2018 US Census. When you look at this slide, you'll see that the blue line is Black or African American. The red line is not Black or African American. And the green line is white alone, not Hispanic. So in 2009, it shows that there was a 7% discrepancy between Blacks with insurance and whites with insurance. Now, as the years went on to 2018, you'll see that that gap closed from 10% down in the African American community to 6% in the white community. So in essence, what this means from an insights perspective is higher levels of African Americans without insurance coverage than whites and non-African Americans. And then the second thing we learned is that these disparities began declining after the Maine Affordable Care Act went into effect in 2014. James? Another way of looking at this data, if we look across having insurance or not having insurance across age groups. So if you look at the green line, that's 2018, the red line is 2014, and the blue line is 2009. So in 2009, you can see 2009 from ages 18 to 24 and 25 to 34 without insurance with really, really high numbers, 34 and 31%. Those numbers came down dramatically in 2018, which remained flat around 18%. And then if you get to the older generation, over 65, you see there's no issues whatsoever. So the higher levels of uninsured between ages of 18 and 34. Once again, the Affordable Care Act kicked into place, which caused those numbers to decline. And once again, no insurance coverage issues with age over 65. James? So leading causes of death. What I'd like to do is call your attention to the red text underneath total US deaths per 100,000 on the left side of this slide. And it says male deaths per 100,000. In 2005, that number was 971.9 versus 864.5 in 2017. So there was a decline of 107.4. And right underneath there, you'll see a blue text, and that's for female deaths per 100,000. So those numbers were 692.3 versus 619.7. Once again, was another decline. So in essence, what this is telling us is that there are more deaths per 100,000 among men than women. And then if you go to the next section on the left, you'll see deaths per 100,000 among females. And you'll see that overall, there's a decline in death rates across all major diseases primarily. And that's the same way with down below, deaths per 100,000 among Blacks or African Americans. But the major causes of death across the US are heart disease, cancer, unintentional injuries, respiratory, and cerebrovascular diseases. So once again, when you think about unintentional injuries, some of the most common types of unintentional injuries in the US include motor vehicle accidents, suffocations, drownings, poisoning, fires, falls, sports and recreation type activities. And as it relates to the cerebrovascular diseases, that's related to conditions or diseases or disorders that affect blood vessels and blood supply to the brain. For example, here we're talking about strokes and or aneurysms and things like that. The other point here is that for ages 50 to 70, heart disease and cancer causes more deaths than all other diseases combined. And then the last point I'll make here about leading causes of death is number 5. Deaths by unintentional injuries and suicide are on the increase, as well as Alzheimer's diseases. So if you look at the left, you can quickly see that the yellow highlighted rows are the ones we're talking about where you see these slight increases over time. James? So here's another slide when you think about actual deaths, and I'll just go straight to the insights on this one. Across all leading causes of deaths, African American women are dying disproportionately higher rates versus white women of the same age group. Number 2, although the numbers are relatively smaller, African American females are more likely to die earlier in life with the major causes of death. And 3, as we said earlier, major causes of death are the things we mentioned earlier. And then number 4 here, the major causes of death among African American women are unintentional injuries for those that are 44 and below, cancer for ages 45 to 84, and heart disease for those 85 plus. So if you think about the personas that we talked about earlier, 61% of African American women in the US ages 44 and below. And the highest among death rates among them is related to unintentional injuries. And a lot of unintentional injuries are things that can be prevented given the right precautions. So, James? So let's talk about mental health. Mental health, this is coming from the Mental Health Organization of America from 2020 data. And as I said earlier, you look at this data, this is 2017 versus 2012, but it still just blows my mind. It's astonishing what we're learning about mental health in our communities. We don't talk about it a whole lot, but it's really impacting us very negatively. And it's something we should start paying very, very close attention to. So when you look at mental health is worsening, over 2 million youths, we're talking ages 12 to 17, have a major depressive episode. And that's increased from 8.7 to actually 13% in 2017. And when we think about that's pretty frustrating. When we say major depressive episode, that actually means that there's a period characterized by low mood or other depression symptoms that last for 2 weeks or more. These are symptoms like feeling sad, hopeless, helpless, feeling guilty or worthless, anxiety, irritability, being frustrated, fatigued, low energy, restlessness, and so forth. So there's a major list of things that are impacting us from a mental health perspective. The second bullet here is over 10 million adults had serious thoughts of suicide. 10 million adults, serious thoughts of suicide. And that's an increase from 3.8 to 4.2 in 2017. And like I said, once again, we probably don't even think about this a whole lot in our community, but that's a huge number, 10 million people. The third bullet here, there's a prevalence rate of substance use disorder, meaning illicit drugs or alcohol dependence or abuse. And unfortunately, this number decreased from 8.5 to 7.7, and there's a decrease of 4.1 in youth ages 12 to 17. Once again, when you think about the personas that we talked about, there's huge impact on our ages of 24 and below as it relates to mental health. The next bullet here, the proportion of youth with private health insurance that do not cover mental or emotional difficulties nearly doubled in 2017 from 4.6 to 8.1. And then only 28.2% of our youth in 10 million adults with severe MDE were receiving some consistent treatment for their issues. Huge issue. And then finally, youth are not being identified as having emotional disturbance, which keeps them from accessing necessary accommodations in order to get help. So once again, huge issues around mental health in our community. So let's talk about access to healthcare. This was actually a study or survey that was done by the National Center for Health Statistics. And the survey was a national health interview survey. And they asked the question, during the past 12 months, was there any time when a person needed care but could not afford it? And the insight that came from this was somewhat shocking. The insight is that access directly tied to healthcare is tied to income level, not race. It's tied to income level, not race. And then under 19 and 65 had less access issues than the ages 18 to 64. So when you look at the details on this, if you go to the far left, you'll see the top heading says delay or non-receipt of needed care during the past 12 months due to cost, selected by the characteristics underneath. Then horizontally, you'll see delay or non-receipt of needed medical care due to cost, due to drug costs, and due to dental care costs. Well, if you look all the way down on the left side under white only, you'll see something that says white only below the poverty level. And then you'll see 18.3, and you'll see underneath there black below the poverty level, 15.0, which are basically on par, which is saying that, you know what, this issue is really not tied, that it's not tied to race. And so it's tied to income levels. So in addition to that, when you look across, even under drugs and even under dental care, you'll see it's pretty consistent. Now, if you go to the top where it says under 19 years and 18 to 64 and 65 years and over, you'll see that for 2017, it's all green for under 19 and 65 years and over, but it's red for the 18 to 64, which means they had more access issues than the under 19 and 65 plus. James? So once again, another recap slide here. Her access to health and physical health. Blacks in general receive worse care than whites for about 40% of 250 quality measures that were outlined by the Department of Health and Human Services. That is a huge number, a huge deficit in our community in receiving healthcare. Number two here, 10% of Blacks have no insurance coverage compared to 6% of whites, which we saw earlier. And we just talked about the National Health Interview Survey. And number four, there are declines in death rates across all major diseases that we discussed. Number five, Black women are dying at disproportionately higher rates than white women. And number six, although the numbers are relatively smaller, Black females are more likely to die earlier in life for major causes of death. And then number seven, Blacks are 3.6 times more likely to die from COVID-19 versus whites. And, you know, we didn't keep changing this number because this number is very dynamic. It was changing on a daily basis. So that number, who knows what it is today, but it's probably still somewhere in that category. Number eight, according to CDC, major causes of death among African-American or Black women are unintentional injuries, which is 44 and below, cancer ages 45 to 84, and heart disease at 85 plus. Now, number 9 and 10 are interesting. The leading causes of death risk factors, according to the World Health Organization, are physical inactivity, means we need to get moving, we need to exercise. 2 is alcohol consumption. 3, tobacco smoking. 4, salt intake, diabetes, obesity, raised blood pressure, and air pollution. And what's interesting is we also did a study with the Good Health Wins initiative. 72% of NCNW member respondents have a significant health condition, but these health conditions align with what I just read you from the World Health Organization. We found through the survey of Good Health Wins that the health conditions include high blood pressure, which was about 44% of the people that responded. Obesity and overweight was 14 plus 29% respectively of the people responded. Type 2 diabetes was 17%, with rounding out with asthma at 10%. James? Her mental health, we've talked about some of these things, suicide being the leading cause of death among Black youths ages 10 to 24. Once again, I can't reemphasize enough the impact this has on our pipeline when you think about the personas that we talked about earlier. And then the next one here, number 2, Black females, grades 9 through 12, are 70% more likely to attempt suicide versus white females of the same age. 70%. We're talking grades 9 through 12. These are our children. We have to reach them. Number 3, the U.S. Surgeon General report indicates that from 1980 to 1995, the suicide rate among Blacks, once again, look at these ages 10 to 14, increased 233% versus 120% in whites. When you look at homelessness in the U.S., the largest part of the homeless population is males, which makes up 60.5%. But then 40% of the U.S. homeless population is Blacks. And 37% of the homeless Americans are unsheltered, which means no place to go, no shelter to go to. Number 5, Black girls are more likely to face adultification biases, meaning that they are seen as, our young Black girls are seen as being more adult-like and less innocent than white girls. They are viewed as needing less nurturing, protection, support, and comforting. And when you think about those numbers we just read around suicidal attempts or suicidal thoughts, they very much need us to wrap our arms around them with nurturing, with protection, with support and comforting, whereas whites think just the opposite. And Black girls are seen as being more independent and knowing more about adult topics and sex. I got to tell you, this information came from Georgetown University, and in the larger deck that we shared with NCNW, there are quite a number of videos that they put out that are very informative, and I would advise you, I would really hope that you would take a look at those at some point in the future. Number 6, compared to white girls, Blacks are more likely to be formally partitioned, referred to the juvenile system, and detained. They are less likely to have cases diverted versus whites. 7, Black girls comprise of a growing population of all teen arrests. We're talking about 30% here. Black girls are 3.5 times more likely to be incarcerated than white girls. And then finally here, while still 2 times versus whites, incarceration rates for Black women are declining fast, like 55% down versus 44% increase for white women between 2000 and 2017. We would hope that those numbers would continue to go down. James? So that's the information that we wanted to share tonight as it relates to the numbers, as it relates to her health, as it relates to the state of the Black woman research that we did back in 2020. But what we want to leave you with tonight is this, that if we lose our women, we lose our girls and boys. If we lose our girls and boys, we lose our families. If we lose our families, we lose our communities. If we lose our communities, we lose generations. Thank you for your time.
At this time, if we would have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A, and we will have 10 minutes of questions for these gentlemen on what you've just seen. Any questions? I ask you refrain from comment and give us questions only. So, Mr. Brown, I'm asked, based on the data, what is the next most critical step as for the 31 single adults with no children?
Sorry, repeat that again for me, Kevin.
Based on the data, what is the next most critical step for as the person is 31 single with no children?
Well, I think whether you have children or not, personally, I think we all play a role in our community and how we help and assist and coach and mentor. When you think about the numbers that we shared around the ages of 14 and below or 10 to 24, there's a huge opportunity for us all to play a role, is the way I would respond to that. James, do you have a perspective?
Yes, thank you for that, Tony. And just to add to that, obviously for each segment, as we shared in the framework earlier, there's your reality and there's your hopes and dreams. And often there is a gap between your reality and the clarity that you have within the hopes and dreams. And so definitely part of doing this study was to influence this through the work that NCNW does. And NCNW does that, both at the policy level, at the grassroots level, and as individuals within NCNW, definitely you play this role. So our urge to you is just to consider that for yourself. Where are you between your reality and your hopes and dreams, but also on the bigger macro to be able to align with the programmatic efforts that NCNW has both nationally and in the sections to be able to do the same as well, given the insights from this data.
What is the percentage of Black female homeless? Do we have any information on that? And any data on that same for older women?
I'm thinking back on the data. I don't remember seeing that, although it may have been in one of the charts. If it is, it's definitely in one of the charts that we shared of the 175 slides that we presented to, and we've handed over to the Committee for the Future. But I can take a quick look even while we're on, and before we leave, I can come back and let you know if there's an answer to that question for sure. But I don't think there was, but I'll take a look at the data.
Was domestic violence included under homicides and unintended injuries?
Yes.
Yes, it was. And the other thing, if I remember correctly about the data, when you talk about domestic violence, I think that was probably the highest number when you talk about homicides. It relates to African American male and females. If I remember the data correctly, it was a pretty high number. We were quite surprised when we saw that, actually.
What can mothers do to educate their sons about single Black girls, mothers, and change the stats?
Well, I think we have a lot of mothers on the phone that could probably answer that better than I can, but I would think it's helping our young men understand who who our partners and our mates really are. Helping them understand how do we work together in this world in order to make it better. Understand how do we partner in order to support each other in whatever it is that we're facing, and whether that's in good times or bad times. I think it's also helping them to understand that, you know what, most kids treat their moms with respect and they understand them regardless of how much discipline they may have to provide. But you know, if I think about females the way I think about my mom, it's the respect that I have for her, and it's respect I have for what she does and what she brings to the table as a part of this world, a part of this country. So I would look at it from that perspective as well. I mean, this is not for me. This is not PhD stuff. It's pretty straightforward, and I think it's a matter of talking to our young men and helping them understand who we are from a female perspective. And they already have a good example of that based on their—
Please put your camera on, sir.
Parents. So anyway, James, I don't know if you have a perspective on that one.
Yeah, no,
Please
I
cut
think
your
it's
camera back
probably.
on, sir.
You're talking to me,
Mr.
son?
Brown? Yes, sir.
Okay, where did it go? I'm looking at myself. Here we go.
Well, he's figuring out
There we
his
go.
camera. I think Tony is
There we
right,
go.
and just to add to that, you know, similar to this forum, you know, some of the insights that we're sharing are an opportunity as they align to NCNW programmatic efforts for you to continue these conversations. You know, definitely when we saw that number of, you know, single moms, you know, the births by African American women compared to other ethnicities, there are stark differences between the ethnicities. And so, you know, as we report the news, we also would like for you to, as an organization, to continue engaging in conversations around how this impacts the state of the Black woman, the Black family, and the communities as well.
Hey, I guess the other thing I would add, Devin, is listening is a very important skill based on the question that you asked. So I think we as African American men, males, I think if we listen more than talk more, I think we'll learn something, and that will help us engage in a way that may be pretty profound.
I see Ms. Brown and Ms. Foster nodding. And I will say at this time, there are several questions. So I will say again, all of this information will land on the NCNW website, as well as the video will be on our NCNW headquarters YouTube page. Gentlemen, they're asked if they can use some of the information in your findings for their meetings and also throughout their local areas. I will leave that question to you.
James, you want to respond?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've done with these slides, definitely you can use. You know, as you get more of the detailed slides, we've indicated which of the visuals have copyrights in them, and definitely if they're indicated with copyrights, you definitely would need to ask for permission from the authors for those before using. But anything that's not indicated, anything that we have produced as part of this, that's you know, produced by the Reimagination team, definitely it's for you to use, and the committee for the future will continue to steward these conversations.
Is there going to be any more?
Before you go on, can I,
Certainly.
before you go to the next questions, if I could, I really appreciate the first question about the 31-year-old unmarried person and where they fit in with this. That very first slide that showed her world and that talked about, well, that showed the framework, your hopes and dreams up through your reality, your self-development, your engagement in community and the country and world, your physical and mental health, your career, your finances and future financial planning, etc. Those things are areas that we believed impact all of us across whatever the age, but particularly in the prime, in that first zone, which is where you'd fit in the demographic age numbers. So The answer for me would be any of those. And what would you feel is the area where you need the most support, would like to have the most connection to NCNW? We're collecting this information. These numbers are numbers. It's information. There is no judgment. So that's the first thing I'd say is the framework around breaking this down so that we can approach our work in a way that allows us to strengthen and empower each one of us as members is what I would invite us to do and look at. Secondly, I love the questions about homeless families, domestic violence numbers, because the thing with these numbers is we can delve deeper, we can find more, we can go further, we can move in the direction that the organization decides it needs to go. And those are two areas I think are very, very important. The question about educating our sons, I love that one. I have 2 sons of my own. In addition, we as a community need to know, again, who we are, what our families look like, and understand that this is who we are, Black. And what I was struck by in those numbers, James and Tony, is that Black women are leading our families now, and we need support in doing what we do. So this is not about judgment. It's not about saying it should be different or not. The organization will decide where it wants to put its work to help support Black women and our families and communities. And all of this information is for us to use and take to our sons. Certainly some of these numbers I talk to my boys about and let them know, look, this is reality, and we all have to find out where we can get in and help make bearing the load easier.
All right, we have a couple more questions. I'm going to consolidate them as quickly as I can. Is there any data to review on the Black women mortality rates and childbirth infant mortality rates?
Yeah, that was one we actually got from the committee early on, I do believe. And we never got around to finding any research on that one, to be honest with you. So you won't see that in the research.
Okay.
But it is something
Is there
that we are aware of.
Yes, very much so.
And we'll be looking at going forward. We did ask about that, yes.
Is there any data that has been spoken to how health issues relate to religious involvement?
I don't remember that. James, do you remember anything around that? I don't remember there being a connection.
Yeah, I don't remember that, although if you could put a clarification of the question on the chat so we can understand better the context of the question.
All right, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Ms. Foster, to start the panel.
Well, first, let me thank James and Tony for this incredibly valuable and helpful presentation of the data of part 1. I remind you of that. And the data, the insights, and for me, the biggest contribution that the reimagination team has made to us is what I consider a game-changing framework, which is to think about the Black woman in the framework you saw as her reality in her world. So James and Tony, thank you so much. And we certainly look forward to part 2 tomorrow evening. The data and trends are very valuable, but equally as important is having a chance to really think about how it applies to NCNW work. So we wanted to make sure that we spent a little time on just thinking about what those numbers mean, and your great questions have already started us on that path. We have invited 2 phenomenal NCNW national and section leaders to give an example of how data was used in the development of a program that NCNW is involved in. So we have first NCNW's vice chair of our board and executive committee, and a committee for the future member, Dr. Helena Johnson, and Shara Denton, who serves also on the executive committee as chair of the Health Equity Committee. So I thank you ladies for being with us, and I turn it over to you.
Dr. Johnson, you're on mute.
Am I unmuted now?
I can hear you now.
Yes.
Okay. I too would like to thank Tony and James for all of that wonderful information that they shared with us. And this is a process that we've been working on for quite a while. And we now know and understand that it's time to start sharing it with everyone. And the focus of what primarily we're going to talk about, Shara and myself, is going to be the health as well as the demographics and numbers for Black women. Because we know a lot of things, we have a lot of information, but I think those pieces that we don't put in place are those pieces that we think don't pertain to us. And so we tend to want to only work with those things that we think are going to be positive and that are going to get us to the next level, whereas everyone else is looking at us as if we are still that underserved group of people, regardless of how educated you may be or anything else. When you walk in a room, you're a Black woman. And until you prove yourself, that's still how you're going to be looked at. What we did as a committee, we came up with 5 things that we're going to help us get through working with all of the committees throughout the organization. Those 5 things are reputation and brand, role and relationships, that's external and internal. Relevance, as you've heard that word so many times today, it's so very important. Then we have to rethink how NCNW is going to operate with agility. And then we have to have the right resources to do it, and we have to be able to make sure that everyone has the right resources and not just some specific groups. And when we talk about coming together, coming to these different committees, for instance, when I meet with Shara and the Health Committee, we're going to have conversations about all of these things that we talked about today. We're going to get some additional answers to some of those questions that you answered. Everything that we get, as Cheryl said, we're going to share. Our main goal is to make sure that everyone has the same information. We want to make sure that you get the information. However, we want to make sure that it's shared in a way that everyone gets it and it's not different in one location than it is in another, because that's another of those things that has really held us back for a long time. We're talking about the branding and the reputation. NCNW has had a wonderful reputation for all of these years. And as health programs go, we have worked with many health programs over the years. We've had those breast cancer campaigns. We had one of the biggest HIV campaigns in the United States. We are now working with COVID and our program for Good Health Wins. And as you will all know or will find out, that the National Council of Negro Women is the largest minority organization that is pushing the vaccines throughout the United States. So we're doing our job. We're out there trying to do those things that need to be done. But we need to make sure that you understand what those things are, how they're being worked through. And the reason that health is so important, I don't think I have to explain that. We all know what we're working with right now. Not only the good parts, but the bad parts. We know how many of our sections have provided vaccines for COVID. We know how many of them have helped in different ways in their area. And this is from coast to coast. This is just not in any specific area. And so as we look at a lot of these things and we understand what this health committee, this health equity committee has been charged with, we're going to have Shar explain to us some of the things that they're working with. And then we'll be able to continue to work with all of you. As you can see, we went through those 5 R's, but those 5 R's entail a lot. So, Shara?
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Again, I'm Shara Denton. I'm the chair of the Health Equity Committee. And our charge prior to COVID was to pinpoint 5 target areas in health that affect African American, minority women, and children. And from that research, we found that breast cancer, HIV, mental health, maternal health, and COVID, eventually COVID, and affordable healthcare were our main targets, because those were the top 5 to 6 that affected our communities the most. Then from there, we made sure to pinpoint experts in each field of each demographic to make sure that they were included in the making of the committee, so that we can provide resources and alternative methods of information to not only our more seasoned members, but to our wings as well. One thing that we started to see was a pattern of a lot of our collegiate sectors doing so many different things that focused on health, but it wasn't really streamlined through NCNW. So our goal has been to start from NCNW from the top all the way down to the bottom and streamline our 5 to 6 initiatives. One thing that we're seeing an increase in also is the focus on mental health, because one thing with our younger members and some of our roots, I'm sure, we found some patterns with mental health and anxiety when it comes to our collegiate sisters. When it comes to tests, exams, focusing on choosing a major or minor, financial aid, choosing different decisions, making money while they're still in school, and our young adults that are transitioning from high school or college into the adult world. So one thing we wanted to do, and we were charged to do, is to find ways that we can spread information and resources that were either free or low cost, so that they would not have any barriers in receiving care. With that being said, so far we've already done about 5 to 6 events virtual to spread awareness and information. And we've also partnered with other committees, such as the Mental Health and Human Trafficking Committee has partnered to provide information as well. So what we want to do is make sure that we are pinpointing our 5 to 6 focus areas and spreading that information across the board, so that everyone's getting, like Dr. Johnson said, receiving the same information, the same resources, and finding ways that this could be affordable to our members. And so from there on, we have found that our committee is growing very quickly with people that have advice, people that have the expertise in those fields, so that we can better equip our members and those outside of our membership with valuable and relatable resources and information.
Thank you, Shara. And again, that's what we have been working on. That's what we will continue to work on. Those of you who belong to some of those committees, you can look forward to seeing us come. You know, we're going to come and visit you. We have a number of questions that we want to ask, and we want to get the response. We want to make sure that the programs that we're offering work well with the members that we are bringing in, so that they understand that whole process and that whole legacy that Mary McLeod left. We talk about, there's a legacy to take care of our young people. And that's one of the main things that we continue to talk about. We don't, we're not proposing to ignore anyone and not do the things that need to be done, but we will continue to work hand in hand with everyone else. We will take all of your information. We will respond to all of your questions. Again, we simply want to make sure that as we're talking about these demographics and you're looking at these numbers and you see that African American women are more disproportionately out of everything. The one thing that we do well, that we do better than anyone else, we become educated. But we have got to reach a point with our education that we can move ourselves forward and not have folks simply take that for granted as well. So we have a lot of people that we know can do a lot of things, but we've got to make sure that everyone knows that, and not just several people, and not just for a limited time or a limited group. We want all those people up front and center. We want you to have everything that you need. We want you to be on those front lines. We want the health and the equity to work for everyone. So as we turn this over for possibly some additional Q&A, we want to thank you again for allowing us to come and share just this little bit of information with you. Deborah, Crystal.
All right, ladies, as we go into the next Q&A session, I have one last follow-up question from the previous session, and that was there any information that was looked into on male and female long-term cohabitation or relationship versus marriage? That's something that was asked about for the demographics. At this time, I would also ask if there's any questions of Dr. Helena Johnson and Ms. Shara Denton about what they said or what can be done with this information.
So just in response to, and Tony, feel free to jump in. No, we did not have any data on the long-term cohabitation versus marriage in the research that we did.
Okay, do we have any questions? Any questions at all? I think we don't at this point.
Okay, Deborah.
Okay, then at this point, the job is pretty easy. This really is my opportunity to thank some incredible people for their role, not only in tonight, but just in the whole process of helping NCNW prepare and consider its future. And again, the word of the evening is relevance. Let me begin by thanking Dr. Johnetta B. Cole, our president and national chair, for her vision and just appointing the committee and getting this work started. She has supported us and has given us great confidence, and we're so appreciative of that. I also would be remiss if I did not thank my partners in crime, the members of the C4F, to it. Special thanks, ladies, and been working for the last 18 months. You've heard from co-chair Cheryl Brown and just now from Dr. Johnson. There are two additional names that I'd like to lift up and thank who are members of the C4F, and that is Regina Posley and Dr. Ariana Brazier, and you will hear from them tomorrow. They will actually participate in the webinar tomorrow. We are beyond grateful to the Reimagination team who just has done a phenomenal job, and as I said, really set NCNW on a path that will serve us well now and in the future. Thank you, Shara Denton. You are leading some of the most important work that NCNW is doing now related to health equity. I also have to express appreciation to our staff partners who just make everything work and work magic for us every day. Crystal Ramjour, Chief Administrative Officer, Jocelyn Coons, Assistant to the CAO, Kevin Johannes, our Director of Communications, and of course, our Executive Director, Janice Mathis. The final thank you go to each of you. I hope that this has been time well spent. It certainly has. Every time I hear the presentation, I hear something else that really triggers your thinking and your desire to act, which was the purpose of this webinar. So with that, I will just again invite you to join us again tomorrow at 7 p.m., same time, same place, to hear the other areas that you saw in the framework, to complete the report of the state of the Black women. So thank you so much. This concludes the webinar, and good evening.